In the vast and unforgiving expanse of the world's oceans, not every battle of World War II was fought beneath the spotlight of glory. Many were swallowed by silence, their stories buried under layers of secrecy, confusion, or simple neglect. As America surged into the global conflict after the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States Navy expanded with breathtaking speed, building ships, deploying men, and venturing into treacherous waters far from home. Yet behind the headlines of victory and valor, there were disasters, moments of profound loss that history chose to overlook. The months following December 1941 were a time of chaos and adaptation. The Pacific became a deadly chessboard, with Japanese forces pushing outward and American commanders scrambling to counter them. Amid that frenzy, ships and sailors vanished with little record. Sometimes there was no time to write a report, no chance for survivors to speak, no witnesses left alive to tell the tale. These are the moments where silence became the only survivor. By early 1942, the Navy's mission stretched from the icy North Atlantic to the steaming jungles of the Solomon Islands. The American people knew names like Midway and Coral Sea, battles that promised hope and revenge. But few spoke of the ships that never came home. Vessels lost not only to enemy fire but to human error, secrecy, or fate itself. Records were often sealed, commanders hesitant to report losses that could shake public morale. It was a war waged both on the front lines and within the bureaucracy of wartime censorship. In those early years, many families waited by radios for word of sons who would never return. Letters arrived months late, sometimes carrying nothing but uncertainty. "Missing in action," the telegrams read, a phrase that became both a sentence and a mystery. For the mothers and wives of sailors, those 3 words meant an endless waiting game. The ocean, unlike a battlefield, left no graves to visit. One of the most haunting aspects of these forgotten disasters is how preventable some may have been. Ships that were poorly equipped with radar, convoys that lacked proper escorts, or orders that pushed crews into impossible conditions, all tell a deeper story about the growing pains of a navy learning to fight a global war. In some cases, records suggest that distress signals went unanswered, either due to radio silence orders or simple confusion amid the fog of war. A declassified naval memo from 1943 reveals a quiet acknowledgement. "Our losses at sea are greater than the public is aware. Certain incidents are to remain classified to protect morale." It's a chilling reminder that information itself was a weapon, controlled and rationed as carefully as ammunition. The stories of lost ships, their coordinates, causes, and even their names, were sometimes withheld for decades. Only through later discoveries, sunken wrecks found by modern explorers, would these forgotten chapters resurface. These are not tales of strategic victories or decisive triumphs. They are stories of human endurance and vulnerability, of sailors facing the vastness of the ocean, cut off from rescue, hoping their last signal would be heard. Each disaster carried its own small universe of courage and tragedy. Men clinging to rafts for days, commanding officers making split-second decisions, and families left in the dark for generations. What makes these stories truly haunting is how quickly they were eclipsed. As the war raged on, the Navy's attention shifted to newer campaigns: North Africa, Normandy, the Philippine Sea. In a conflict that spanned continents, smaller tragedies became statistical footnotes. Yet for those who served aboard the doomed ships, these were not minor events. They were the entire world collapsing in fire and salt water. Even today, historians continue to uncover long-lost accounts, logs, and survivor testimonies that shed light on what was once hidden. The passage of time has stripped away some of the secrecy, but the emotional weight remains. These were not mere accidents of war. They were moments that shaped policies, doctrines, and the very way the Navy approached survival at sea. As we begin to unearth the stories of the 5 most forgotten US Navy disasters of WWII, we return to those places where courage met catastrophe. From the shark-filled waters of the Pacific to the cold, grey depths of the Atlantic, each case carries echoes of unanswered questions and unresolved grief. Why were some ships left without rescue? How did so many disappear without trace? And why, after all these years, are some still missing beneath the waves? The answers lie in a mix of human error, wartime secrecy, and the boundless power of the sea. In the next part, we descend into one of the earliest and most heartbreaking of these tragedies: the loss of the USS Juno and the 5 brothers whose story would shake a nation and redefine the very meaning of sacrifice. It was November 13th, 1942, the thick of the Guadalcanal campaign. The Pacific Theater had become a crucible of attrition, where ships and men vanished almost daily in the chaos of naval combat. In the dark waters off the Solomon Islands, a US light cruiser, the USS Juno, CL-52, sailed into history not through victory, but through tragedy. Her loss would devastate an American family, shock a nation, and quietly expose the staggering human cost of war at sea. The Juno was a proud Atlanta-class light cruiser, bristling with 16 5-inch dual-purpose guns designed for anti-aircraft defense. Commissioned in February 1942 and manned by nearly 700 sailors, she was sleek, fast, and deadly. The kind of ship America needed to push back against Japan's relentless naval power. Among her crew were 5 brothers from Waterloo, Iowa: George, Francis, Joseph, Madison, and Albert Sullivan. They had enlisted together, determined to serve together, refusing the Navy's offer to separate them across ships. "We stick together," George reportedly said. "We're a fighting team." In mid-November, the Juno joined Task Force 67 under Admiral Daniel Callahan, assigned to defend the US beachhead on Guadalcanal from a Japanese bombardment force. The night of November 12-13 erupted into one of the most chaotic surface engagements of the war. The first naval battle of Guadalcanal. Under pitch-black skies, radar screens flickered, destroyers crossed unpredictable paths, and gunfire erupted at point-blank range. The Juno, fighting alongside the cruisers, San Francisco and Helena, traded fire with Japanese battleships, Hiei and Kirishima. Just after dawn, the battle's aftermath revealed a scene of ruin. Several American ships had been battered beyond repair. Callahan himself was dead on the bridge of San Francisco. The Juno was heavily damaged, struck by a torpedo from the Japanese destroyer, Amatsukaze. She limped away from the fight, her hull fractured, engines faltering. Captain Lyman Swenson, commanding the Juno, ordered her to withdraw with the remaining ships toward Espiritu Santo for repairs. But fate had not finished its work. Around 11 a.m., as the battered formation moved southeast of San Cristobal Island, a Japanese submarine, I-26, lurked in their path. It fired a spread of torpedoes. One missed the San Francisco. Another struck the Juno directly on her port side, hitting the same section damaged the night before. In an instant, the ship vanished. A single cataclysmic explosion split her in two. Witnesses aboard nearby vessels reported seeing a massive column of smoke and debris. And then nothing. The Juno was gone, taking with her over 680 men. Only a handful survived the blast. The Helena and San Francisco, fearing another submarine attack, were ordered not to stop. In wartime protocol, survival often gave way to self-preservation. A US B-17 later sighted survivors clinging to debris and reported the position, but no rescue was sent for 8 long days. When help finally arrived, only 10 men remained alive. Among the dead were all 5 Sullivan brothers. Their deaths shattered the illusion of war as a distant, heroic enterprise. The Sullivan family's story dominated headlines back home. President Roosevelt sent a personal letter of condolence. The tragedy led directly to the US War Department's sole survivor policy, which prohibited family members from serving on the same vessel or combat unit, a policy that would later protect men like Joseph, Kennedy Jr.'s brother, John F. Kennedy, in his own naval service. Yet beneath the public mourning, questions lingered. Why was there such a delay in rescue? Did the Navy suppress details of the loss to protect morale? Survivor accounts later described the sea turning into a floating graveyard, with men dying of exposure, thirst, and sharks. The screams, one survivor recalled, never left me. For years, the wreck of the Juno remained undiscovered, her final resting place unknown, a symbol of how the Pacific's vastness could erase even the most powerful warships. In 2018, 76 years after her sinking, the research vessel Petrel, funded by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, located the Juno more than 2 miles beneath the surface. Her broken hull lay silently on the ocean floor, a time capsule of November 1942. The discovery brought closure to descendants, but also renewed reflection. Beneath layers of silt and corrosion lay not just metal, but memory of courage, family, and the silence of the sea. The story of the Juno endures because it bridges two worlds: the public face of wartime heroism and the private reality of unimaginable loss. It reminds us that war's most profound tragedies are not always strategic defeats, but human ones. And yet, this was only the beginning. Within 3 years, the Navy would suffer another catastrophic loss, this time under the weight of secrecy so great that the truth would remain hidden for decades. Next, we follow the doomed voyage of the USS Indianapolis, a ship that carried the most secret cargo of World War II and vanished into infamy before the world even knew she was gone. In the summer of 1945, as the Second World War neared its bloody conclusion, one US Navy cruiser embarked on a mission so secret that few aboard knew its true purpose. The USS Indianapolis, CA-35, a Portland-class heavy cruiser with a distinguished combat record, was chosen to deliver components for a weapon that would change history: the atomic bomb. Her journey began as a triumph of precision and secrecy. It would end as one of the most horrific naval disasters in American history. The Indianapolis had already seen more than her share of war. Commissioned in 1932, she had served as flagship for Admiral Raymond Spruance and fought in nearly every major Pacific campaign, from the Aleutians to Saipan and Okinawa. By July 1945, she carried scars from battle and from the relentless pace of war. But the ship's next assignment would be unlike any other. She was to deliver top-secret cargo to Tinian Island, uranium-235 and key bomb components for Little Boy, the first atomic weapon that would later devastate Hiroshima. On July 16, 1945, the same day the first atomic test detonated in New Mexico, the Indianapolis left San Francisco under sealed orders. Captain Charles Butler McVeigh III was told only what he needed to know. His crew of 1,196 men set course across the Pacific, unaware of the world-changing materials stored in their hold. Traveling alone, without escort or sonar protection, the ship moved swiftly and silently through waters thought to be relatively safe. It was a routine that had become all too familiar and fatally deceptive. After just 10 days, on July 26th, the Indianapolis arrived at Tinian and unloaded her mysterious cargo. The delivery was a success. Without ceremony or fanfare, the ship then departed for Leyte Gulf in the Philippines to join preparations for the eventual invasion of Japan. The war, it seemed, was nearing its end. But at midnight on July 30th, in the empty stretch of ocean between Guam and Leyte, a shadow stalked the cruiser. The Japanese submarine, I-58 So, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto. At 12:14 a.m., Hashimoto ordered 6 torpedoes fired. 2 struck the Indianapolis. The first ripped through the bow. The second hit near the fuel tanks and powder magazine. The explosion split the cruiser's spine. Within 12 minutes, she was gone, sinking into the darkness with over 300 men trapped below decks. Around 900 sailors were thrown into the sea, many without life rafts, clinging to debris in oil-covered waters. No distress signal was ever received. The Navy had no idea the ship was missing. What followed was a nightmare that defied imagination. The survivors drifted in the open Pacific under a blazing sun. They had little food, no water, and almost no hope. Saltwater sores festered, hallucinations spread, and discipline dissolved as men drank the sea in desperation. Then came the sharks. Drawn by blood and motion, they circled and attacked relentlessly, day after day. They would come up and bump you, recalled survivor Edgar Harrell. Then someone near you would scream, and he'd be gone. For 4.5 days, the Navy remained unaware of the disaster. The ship's expected arrival went unconfirmed, and routine communications lapses allowed her absence to pass unnoticed. It wasn't until August 2nd that a patrol bomber, flying a routine anti-submarine sweep, spotted an oil slick and frantic survivors. A massive rescue effort began, but by then it was far too late. Of the 1,196 men aboard, only 316 survived. The rest perished from exposure, dehydration, or shark attacks. In the aftermath, public outrage demanded answers. Captain McVeigh became the scapegoat, court-martialed for failure to zigzag. He was the only US Navy captain ever convicted for losing his ship to enemy action. Yet even the Japanese submarine commander, Hashimoto, testified that zigzagging would not have saved the Indianapolis. Years later, the truth emerged. Navy intelligence had known of I-58's presence in the area, but failed to warn McVeigh. The captain carried the guilt for decades before taking his own life in 1968. It wasn't until 2000 that Captain McVeigh was officially exonerated by Congress. A small measure of justice. Long overdue, the Indianapolis remained missing until August 2017, when an expedition led by Paul Allen's research team discovered her wreck nearly 18,000 feet below the surface. Resting in eerie silence, her shattered hull told the story of both triumph and tragedy. The ship that delivered the weapon that ended one war, only to become one of its final victims. The disaster of the Indianapolis remains one of the darkest chapters in US naval history, not just for the loss of life, but for what it revealed about communication failures, secrecy, and accountability. Beneath the layers of heroism and horror lies an unsettling truth. In the machinery of total war, even heroes can vanish unnoticed. Yet the story of forgotten loss does not end here. Years before the atomic age, another ship, smaller, older, and equally doomed, had already been lost to history. Its sinking marked the first American blood spilled at sea by Nazi Germany, even before the United States had declared war. In the next chapter, we uncover the fate of the USS Reuben James, the destroyer that became both a warning and a mystery of America's entry into World War II. It was still 1941. The United States had not yet entered the war, and across the Atlantic, German U-boats prowled the dark waters with ruthless precision. Britain was struggling for survival, depending on convoys of American and Allied ships to bring vital supplies through what Winston Churchill called the worst journey in the world. The US Navy, though technically neutral, was already escorting these convoys halfway across the Atlantic under the terms of the Neutrality Patrol. It was a dangerous game, one that would soon turn deadly. At its center stood a single ship, the USS Reuben James, DD-245, an aging destroyer with a storied past and a tragic destiny. The Reuben James was no stranger to peril. Commissioned in 1920, she had served in the early interwar years as part of the Atlantic Fleet and even participated in evacuations during the Spanish Civil War. But by 1941, the world had changed beyond recognition. Germany's U-boat fleet, the Unterseeboot, was waging unrestricted warfare against Allied shipping. Convoys stretching from Newfoundland to the British Isles became floating targets. And although the United States was not yet officially at war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's orders were clear. American ships were to shoot on sight at any Axis submarine threatening US or Allied vessels. In late October 1941, the Reuben James joined convoy HX-156, departing from Halifax, Nova Scotia. The destroyer's task was simple: escort the convoy across the perilous Mid-Atlantic Gap, the region farthest from land-based air cover. Under the command of Lieutenant Commander Haywood Lane Edwards, the Reuben James took her place on the convoy's western flank, serving as an early warning screen for any approaching submarines. The weather was foul, the sea rough, and the tension aboard palpable. Everyone knew the Germans were out there, unbeknownst to the Reuben James. Lurking in the depths ahead was the German submarine U-5522, commanded by Erich Topp, one of the Kriegsmarine's most skilled and audacious U-boat aces. On the early morning of October 31st, 1941, Halloween, Topp sighted the convoy moving through the murky waters near Iceland. At 5:25 a.m., he fired a spread of torpedoes into the dark. One of them struck the Reuben James squarely amidships, near her forward magazine. The explosion was catastrophic. The entire bow of the ship disintegrated in a fireball, killing most of the crew instantly. The blast was so violent that the front third of the destroyer was simply gone, leaving the stern section momentarily afloat before it, too, sank beneath the waves. Of the 159 men aboard, only 44 survived. Many were killed before they could even react. The scene that followed was harrowing. Survivors clung to life rafts and floating wreckage, surrounded by oil and fire. The convoy pressed on, its merchant ships unable to stop for fear of further U-boat attacks. Rescue came hours later from another escort, the USS Niblack, which pulled half-frozen sailors from the sea. Lieutenant Commander Edwards, the Reuben James's captain, was among the missing. News of the sinking hit Washington like a thunderclap. America was not yet at war, yet here was proof that the war had already come for America. The Reuben James was the first US Navy vessel sunk by enemy action in World War II. Her loss predated Pearl Harbor by more than a month. Roosevelt addressed the nation, his voice heavy with restrained anger, calling the incident an act of piracy. The song "The Sinking of the Reuben James," written by Woody Guthrie and later performed by the Almanac Singers, turned the tragedy into a haunting protest ballad, a warning of the storm to come. "Tell me, what were their names?" the lyrics asked. "Did you have a friend on the good Reuben James?" Yet even in the wake of the outrage, unanswered questions lingered. Why was the Reuben James sailing at the front of the convoy, the most dangerous position in the line? Some naval officers quietly questioned whether she had been intentionally placed there as a shield for merchantmen, a role that all but guaranteed disaster. Others wondered if the destroyer's orders to engage first made her appear as an aggressor, giving Germany the justification it needed for the attack. Officially, Berlin claimed the sinking was accidental, that the U-boat commander could not see the flag in the dark, but few in Washington believed it. The loss of the Reuben James became a quiet turning point. It marked the end of America's neutrality in all but name. The Navy increased its Atlantic patrols, tightened convoy escorts, and pushed even closer to open conflict. Just 5 weeks later, Japanese planes attacked Pearl Harbor, and the United States entered the war in full. For the families of the 115 men lost on the Reuben James, the declaration came too late. Today, the Reuben James rests somewhere off the coast of Iceland, more than 2 miles beneath the North Atlantic. Her precise location remains uncertain. No expedition has yet confirmed her wreck, but her story endures as a symbol of the blurred line between peace and war, between neutrality and inevitability. She was the first to fall, and her loss foretold the oceans of blood yet to come. The war would soon shift eastward, toward the vast Pacific, where the ocean became both ally and enemy. There, 2 more ships, the USS Wasp and the USS Liscum Bay, would meet their fiery ends in sudden, almost unimaginable disasters. Each vanished in minutes, leaving behind haunting questions about what went wrong and what lessons the Navy was too slow to learn. By 1942, the Pacific Ocean had become a graveyard of steel. American ships darted across its endless horizon, carrying thousands of men into battles fought on tiny islands whose names few back home could pronounce. Amid the chaos, 2 U.S. Navy carriers, the USS Wasp, CV-7, and the USS Liscum Bay, CVE-56, met fates so sudden, so devastating, that even decades later, their stories evoke disbelief. These were not quiet sinkings in remote seas. They were explosions that lit the sky, killing hundreds in moments and vanishing from public memory just as swiftly. The first, the USS Wasp, was a sleek Yorktown-class aircraft carrier commissioned in April 1940. She had been built as a compromise, smaller and lighter than her sister carriers due to naval treaty limits, but no less capable. By 1942, the Wasp had already ferried British Spitfires to Malta, earning praise from Churchill himself. In August, she joined the struggle for Guadalcanal, providing vital air cover for the first American landings in the Solomon Islands. The campaign was young and uncertain, and the Wasp's pilots were often the only thing standing between the fragile beachhead and annihilation. On September 15, 1942, Task Force 18, with Wasp at its center, steamed through the narrow waters south of San Cristobal Island. The ship carried nearly 2,200 men, and the crew was preparing to launch another day of airstrikes. The sea was calm, the mood almost routine. Then at 2:44 p.m., the Japanese submarine I-19, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Takakazu Kinashi, fired 6 torpedoes. 3 struck Wasp along her starboard side. The result was catastrophic. Aviation fuel ignited instantly, feeding a chain of explosions that raced through hangar decks packed with armed planes. Flames burst skyward as sailors ran through choking smoke. Witnesses later described men being hurled overboard by the blast. Others engulfed as the decks melted beneath their feet. Captain Forrest Sherman ordered abandon ship within 20 minutes. The carrier burned for hours before finally sinking beneath the waves. Of the 2,162 aboard, 193 were killed or missing. Yet, even in her destruction, Wasp saved others. 2 of the other torpedoes fired by I-19 went on to strike the battleship North Carolina and destroyer O'Brien, proving how a single submarine could devastate an entire task force in seconds. Her wreck was rediscovered in 2019, lying upright on the seafloor more than 14,000 feet below the surface. The ship's hull, remarkably intact, bore the scars of her final battle, a silent testament to the fury of that September afternoon. A year later, tragedy struck again, this time on a smaller carrier, one designed not for glory, but for necessity. The USS Liscome Bay, a Casablanca-class escort carrier, was launched in 1943 and deployed to the Gilbert Islands campaign. These baby flat tops were crucial in providing air support for amphibious assaults, but were lightly armored, floating tinderboxes carrying tons of aviation fuel and munitions. On November 24, 1943, the Liscome Bay was anchored near Makin Atoll, her planes returning from strikes against Japanese positions. Dawn had just broken. Without warning, the Japanese submarine I-175 loosed a single torpedo. It struck directly beneath the ship's bomb magazine. In an instant, the Liscome Bay erupted in a blinding white explosion. The blast tore the carrier apart, hurling fragments hundreds of feet into the air. Flames engulfed the deck. Within 23 minutes, she was gone. Of her 916 crewmen, 644 perished, including Rear Admiral Henry Mullinix, the first US admiral killed in action during the Pacific War. Survivors described the horror in stunned disbelief. The heat so intense that steel seemed to melt. The sky filled with falling debris, the sea boiling with fuel. It was over before anyone could even react, one sailor recalled. One moment we were at breakfast. The next the ship was gone. The Navy investigated, searching for explanations. Some blamed inadequate armor, others pointed to the volatility of the aircraft fuel or the close-packed ammunition stores. But the truth was simpler and crueler. These escort carriers were never built to withstand such blows. Designed for rapid construction and minimal cost, they were expendable by design, a fact that few of the men who served aboard them ever fully understood. The Liscome Bay's sinking stunned the fleet. Her loss, coming so soon after victories at Tarawa and Makin, was a reminder that no ship, no matter how small or peripheral, was safe from the hidden killers of the Pacific. Yet as with the Wasp, her story faded quickly, eclipsed by larger battles and grander victories. The war machine rolled forward, and the dead were left behind in silence. Today, these two ships symbolize a grim paradox of the Pacific War. The ocean that carried America to victory also claimed its finest sons without warning. Both the Wasp and Liscome Bay were destroyed in mere minutes, their wrecks resting thousands of feet apart on the same vast seabed. A haunting reminder of the price paid for dominance at sea. But for every ship lost in battle, there were others that simply vanished. Ships that left port and never returned, erased not by torpedoes or bombs, but by miscommunication, weather, or sheer bad luck. As the war drew to a close and the world celebrated victory, a few of these disappearances remained unresolved, shrouded in mystery even decades later. In the final chapter, we turn to these ghosts of the sea, vessels lost to history and rediscovered only in recent years. Their stories reveal the quiet, forgotten face of war. Not glory, not victory, but silence beneath the waves. The war was finally over. Japan had surrendered, Europe was rebuilding, and American ships once again dotted peaceful harbors. But beneath the calm surface of post-war optimism, the sea still held its secrets. In the vast reaches of the Pacific and the Atlantic, dozens of US Navy vessels had vanished during World War II, some in combat, some in transit, others for reasons still unknown. Their names rarely appeared in textbooks, their stories buried under more celebrated victories. Yet these silent graves of steel and saltwater remind us that even triumph comes with a shadow. For many, the end of the war meant closure. But for others, the families of missing sailors, the historians sifting through incomplete records, the conflict never truly ended. More than 16,000 American servicemen remain missing in action from World War II, many lost at sea. Among the ships that carried them were smaller destroyers, submarines, and transports whose fates were mysteries for decades. They did not vanish into myth, but into the simple reality of a world at war, where communication failed, storms raged, and sometimes no one was watching when the ocean took its toll. One such mystery was the USS Dorchester, a US Army transport ship sunk in the icy North Atlantic in February 1943. Packed with over 900 men, including 4 chaplains, she was struck by a German torpedo just before dawn. Within minutes, the ship was gone. Survivors later told of the chaplains giving up their life jackets so others might live. their voices heard praying as the vessel slipped beneath the waves. The story became legend, yet even as it inspired millions, the wreck itself remained lost for years, a physical reminder that heroism often ends unseen. Further east, in the Pacific, another vessel disappeared without a trace, the submarine USS Greyback, SS-208. In February 1944, after sinking more than a dozen Japanese ships, the Greyback transmitted her final message. She had just sunk 2 enemy freighters and was heading home. Then silence. For decades, historians debated her fate. Some speculated that she struck a mine, others believed she was destroyed in combat. It wasn't until 2019 that her wreck was finally located south of Okinawa, resting 1,400 feet underwater. A single bomb from a Japanese plane had struck her directly, ending her mission in seconds. Her discovery provided long-awaited answers to families who had spent 75 years wondering. The rediscovery of these ships has become its own quiet campaign, a second, more peaceful war fought not with weapons but with sonar, robotics, and patience. Explorers like Robert Ballard and Paul Allen's research teams have turned modern technology toward the past, mapping forgotten battlefields beneath the sea. Each discovery peels back a layer of mystery, revealing not just wreckage but stories. The USS Indianapolis, Juno, Wasp, and Greyback, all rediscovered in the last 2 decades, now rest within digital archives. Their images preserved for history, yet not every question finds an answer. The ocean remains a keeper of secrets, and some wrecks, like the Reuben James, have yet to be found. Even now, sonar scans come back empty, as though the Atlantic itself refuses to give her up. For historians, this absence is haunting. "It's not just about metal," said one naval archaeologist. "It's about men, moments, and meaning. Every ship we find completes a story that was left unfinished." These forgotten disasters form an unseen chain through World War II's naval history. They remind us that for every Enterprise or Missouri that returned home draped in glory, there were ships that simply never made it back. Some sank in minutes, others disappeared into storms, and some, like the Indianapolis, were doomed by the very secrecy of their missions. Each loss carried not only human tragedy but also a lesson about overconfidence, communication, and the limits of human control in a war fought on nature's terms. As we look back across 8 decades, the ocean still whispers their names. The Juno, where 5 brothers perished together. The Indianapolis, where sharks circled for days. The Reuben James, sunk before war was even declared. The Wasp and Liscum Bay, swallowed in fire. Their stories are linked not by defeat but by remembrance. They represent the other side of victory, the part written in silence, sacrifice, and the weight of what was lost. In the end, the forgotten disasters of the US Navy during World War II are not simply tales of tragedy. They are the unfinished sentences of history, rediscovered one by one in the depths. Each wreck uncovered is a message resurfacing from the past, a reminder that war is not only about winning, but about what and who is left behind. And somewhere, far beneath the surface, amid the cold and endless dark, the ships still rest as they fell, their decks quiet, their flags long gone, their crews forever on watch.